Hi guys, so Parliament was back at work on Monday after a long hiatus, and the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper was answering questions from MPs. Now, one of the MPs who raised a point was Richard Tice, probably filling in for Nigel Farage, who was in America doing stuff with Donald Trump. Now, he raised the point of leaving the European Convention on Human Rights as the only way to stop the boats. Have a listen to this.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With crossings up over 40% this year alone at some 30,000. Clearly the government's current policies are acting as a magnet, not a deterrent. So when will the Home Secretary realise that the only effective deterrent is to detain and deport everybody who comes here illegally, and to do that we must leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
Home Secretary.
Well, this government has increased the returns of those who have no right to be here since the election, including a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers. We're strengthening enforcement and bringing in new counter-terrorism powers to go after the criminal gangs, counter-terrorism powers that incomprehensibly his party has voted against and seems to be opposing the action that we need to go after the criminal gangs. If he would support them, if the Conservatives would support them, we could bring those powers in swiftly in the course of a few months and give our law enforcement the powers to take stronger action against those criminal gangs. And I hope he would support the agreement with France as well that does provide for the immediate detention of people arriving in the UK and returning them also to France as well. The trouble with his party's policies is, frankly, they sound an awful lot like the last Conservative government's policies that totally failed. And so whilst the previous Conservative government was chaos, his party just seems to be chaos on steroids. They're not trying to solve the problem. All they're trying to do is exploit it. What we need is a properly controlled and managed system that goes after the criminal gangs who should not be able to get away with their vile trade.
Okay, a little bit of grandstanding there, and of course a little bit of misinformation. You know, you don't need the Tories and Reform to get policies through. You have a massive majority in the House of Commons. Anyway, this idea, we just need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. This will create the deterrent to stop the boats coming. This is what Richard Tice, of course, has been pushing. It's exactly the same as the Conservatives, just dressed up in a different way. What was the Conservative plan? Well, we'll send people to Rwanda. Okay, but the problem with that was you're sending people to a country that's not safe. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that. So it didn't matter if you legislated that Rwanda was safe. The Supreme Court said you can't send people. And at the end of the day, they sent 4 people voluntarily. So it was not a deterrent. But the whole idea of a deterrent is that people should know about it. Does anyone honestly believe that people who were traveling across the Mediterranean Sea were checking what Rishi Sunak was saying about the Rwanda scheme at the time? Of course not. So a deterrent would only work as if people know about it, and it actually can work as a deterrent. Of course, the Tories had no plan in place. They just threw this against the wall, hoping that it would stick. And Reform UK are doing pretty much the same thing with the ECHR. They keep saying, we need to leave the ECHR in order to stop the boats. No, there are countries that are part of the ECHR who are deporting people, and the UK government obviously is deporting people as well. But if you don't have agreements with other countries, then you can't deport people there. And this whole thing of, well, we're just going to detain people, process them and deport them, well, that used to be the plan. But the Tories decided not to process people, the middle step, and it resulted in the backlog building up. So the only way that Reform could actually achieve their goal of detaining, processing and deporting is if the backlog was down to 0. But the backlog is nowhere near 0. It could take years to get it down to 0. And if you did get it down to 0, then there'd be no worry about small boats or anything, because people would, as soon as they would arrive, they would be processed and detained and deported if necessary, or they would move on to refugee status. But Reform need to find some sort of gimmick, like the Tories, to convince people that they're the party that should be in charge. And unfortunately, more people are talking about the ECHR, and even the Labour government are tapping into the idea of maybe we should tweak it some way, maybe we should try and pander to Farage and Reform and the right wing and see if we can satisfy these people. I'm sorry to say to Yvette Cooper, you can't satisfy the right. They will never be satisfied. They will always come back for more. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.